Hey everybody, we're back here at the Innovation Storytellers Show with my fantastic co-host for this conversation, Peter Temes, the CEO and founder of the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations, ILO. If you haven't yet gone through the course of this series, this is episode 4 of our 4-part series. Please go and check out the other 3 episodes. They are just fantastic. We are talking about trust. We are talking about the old and new rules of innovation. Our last conversation was about the innovation awareness gap and where your teams are not knowing about all the amazing work that you do and probably some resistance that gets built up over time. Today, we are going to approach that particular topic and a couple of more as well, this intersection of innovation and communication, and today's conversation about innovation resistance. How many of you have had this experience of trying to roll out a brand new idea and everyone is just ignoring you? Everyone is pretending this isn't happening, or battle lines are drawn, politics kicks in, and suddenly your fantastic idea is getting trampled on in the middle of a heated political debate. So just a statistic to share with you on the front of innovation resistance, a study published by the Harvard Business Review revealed that 70% of organizational changes fail due to resistance from employees, often stemming from poor communication about the reasons behind the changes, as well as their potential benefits. And if you've heard us talking, Peter and I, that this pain and gain situation in our empathy maps is central, right, to people understanding what are the benefits for them. Peter, share with us a little bit about your experience on this front, the battlegrounds, let's say, of innovation resistance. There are some organizations that are not having it.
I think you're right. And I think on a couple of occasions, I've run some smaller organizations where the people I was supposedly helping weren't having me or it or the agenda. And it's really interesting. The first thing you need to say is the folks who resist have important things to tell you.
Yeah.
When you see the kinds of resistance you get, some of it is instinctive and inevitable, and that's okay. There are ways to kind of program around that.
That's just a natural clinging to the status quo. It's never been done that way before. Why would we switch now? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right. A cognitive human bias toward overvaluing fear rather than opportunity. That's hard baked in the human brain, and it's there for a reason. And it might be true if the imaginary humans in the time of dinosaurs, which we know weren't there, but if you're being chased by dinosaurs and mastodons, it makes sense. If you don't live in a nicely built house and drive in a car and wear clothes that keep you warm, change is not usually your buddy. But going further, especially if you're in any kind of a corporate structures exist in many ways to prevent the kind of natural atrophy of value that comes when you don't build those corporate habits. People tend to be hired not to do a job that isn't there yet. They're hired to do something that's already there. So they've been trained, they've been incented to do a thing. And they might find incremental ways to do it better that give them as workers or as executives more reward within a fairly narrow range of options. But to say we're moving to a completely different way of doing things, even if it's just in one part of the job, it's scary. I know every time I've upgraded a piece of technology on my laptop, I hate it.
Hate it. Oh my God, I'm trying to find an interface for my Gmail that feels exactly like Outlook.
Yeah.
Like, I just want it to look the same. I'm happy to use Gmail, but damn.
And then you use it for a month. You force yourself. Use it for a month. And then you take a peek back at the old thing and you're like, oh my God, this thing stinks. This new thing is so much. Why was I resisting? Now, why is it? Why do you do those upgrades? So this is really interesting. Sometimes it's a quote unquote forced upgrade.
Right.
And you're like, why do you bastards who already took my money for software that was working just fine? Why did you just force me to change? I hate you. And then they forced you a month later, you're like, it's pretty good. But if you had the opportunity to fill out a survey in that moment, or if you saw your boss at lunch, you might give him the stink eye because you didn't choose this. You don't really understand the context, and it's tough. We did a project for the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority's Capital Improvements Group.
My favorite form
Yeah.
of city transportation.
Yeah, very popular group of people in New York. But they asked us to look at ways to lower resistance, lower pushback about introducing a new workplace technology.
Mhm.
And some of the stories we found that were pretty clever. Hard to do, it has to fit. If you pull out the old technology first and folks are living without it, the
Oh,
new thing you introduce becomes much more valuable in their imaginations because it's a life raft, right? Now, that's a little sneaky.
it's a
However,
little challenging too, right? If you have some systems that are
well,
24/7,
that's right.
which almost
Which is,
all of ours are today.
yeah, which is why you can do that in a carefully structured way. But you can't, I mean, let's take out the signaling system in the subway, and then people are really going to want the new one. No, that wouldn't work.
Probably
However,
not.
but you can do, there are a lot of tools you can use and a lot of tools that relate to human behavior and how we influence each other. So in an example like that, Procter and Gamble ran for a bunch of years what they called the Clay Street Project.
Mm.
And it was kind of a new work structure, new idea incubator, but it was also very much an internal change management tool. So number one, if you got tapped, if you got the invitation, you're, let's say, a brand manager, assistant brand manager, technician, and you say your boss has nominated you to spend a 60 or 90-day cycle at the Clay Street Project. So you're in Cincinnati at the headquarters, and a mile away from HQ, which is like a world away, on Clay Street, there's this funky loft-like environment with maybe 30, 40 people doing different things at any given moment. But they cycled folks from the mothership through.
Hmm.
And they would do all kinds of things. They'd say, here's a project that we're working on. It's new, it's exciting, we're going to test it. And you're on the development and testing team for the next 90 days. And here's a new set of tools. And here's how we're going to run our collaboration meetings. They were doing two things at once, generally. Testing this new real thing, so it was real, but also introducing some new work tools. And it might be something like, yeah, we want you to communicate on this platform. If we're doing it for a sales group, we might say, we want you to log every sales contact you have for this new project. So it's not catching up. It's not loading your old stuff in on this new thing called Salesforce. It's okay that you never heard of it. We're trialing this. This is our way of testing the software, but it's also our way of getting user feedback and creating advocates. When they bring people into that environment and they give them the kind of tool like Slack, if you've ever used that nice desktop technology tool. I'm still a Slack resistor, but it's fine. I was actually, in the last job I had, running a small higher ed environment, I was told by my chief of staff, oh, you're going to have so many meetings, you absolutely need to get rid of that little blue book you keep in your back pocket to put your handwritten meeting appointments in. You're going to need the Google Calendar. I'm like, absolutely not. I don't want that. I hate that. And I am an addict. I was forced to use it by circumstance. And it really made the first time I bought an airline ticket, and then I went to key it in and it was already there in my calendar. I was like, ooh, this is better than what I liked more. So, okay, I'm in. You look at Clay Street under P&G, they took groups like this and they exposed them to new technologies as well as new ways of collaborating. Of course, the projects that they gave these people to do were important, but they were incrementally important. The ability to work in a better, smarter, more impactful way that better represented the values of the firm than the baseline. That was the kind of thing that would change much more over time. And what they engineered the human experience for, and even selected folks for. I mean, sometimes it's like, yeah, we have this really key project. You're the one we want because there's a lot of innovation storytelling in this. Of course, we want you. But there's another dimension. Man, you are a leader. We can tell by the teams that you're on. Even if you're not an expert on those teams, they get to be successes at a higher rate when you're on them, right? You have a bigger footprint in terms of your communications with other folks of influence. You're an influencer. So we want you exposed early and deeply, and then you can be the informal guide because that's who you are. We don't even have to train you for that. You're going to talk about it. You're going to support people to roll this kind of change forward. So doing it incrementally is key. But look at the wisdom of Clay Street. It's a lab. It's not just here's our plan for a change and here's a good way to get you on board. It's a long period of time with leadership folks in the room with you. And you better believe they are changing the specs on the new thing that they're trying to sell. So they're listening as well as gathering a kind of compliance set from folks who want change. And this is the real insight about change management is not about making the plan we have something that everyone starts to follow. Change management is we have a direction, we have principles, we have goals, and we're going to use different tools, and we're going to customize it on the fly. And what that means is you, as someone in the org who can push back or not, every time you push back, we recognize you're giving us valuable signals. And we're gonna polish off the rough edges. We're gonna add what's missing, because your resistance isn't just something to push against, right? We never want this or this. What we want is your resistance to be a positive tool that we can observe and learn from and get beside you and guide you where we really need to get.
Right. Even if the resistance is wrong, right? I mean, even if it is that classic digging in the heels, et cetera, but it's still something is creating a hurdle, right? Even if it's not necessarily the spoken thing. And I'm particularly tuned into the fact that even though employees may put up a bunch of resistance, Deloitte did a study that said 87% of employees believe that organizations that fail to innovate risk falling behind from their competitors. So they know that innovation has to happen. And yet, oftentimes it feels like the buck stops with me. And that buck is no joke. The Holmes report, which is central in my industry, in the communications industry, kind of the Bible of the PR world, estimates that businesses with 100 employees lose an average of $420,000 annually due to poor communication. This is not a nice to have, right? It's a must have of thinking about, to your point, I want even my grossest and most verbal critics of the change to be my sandpaper, to be my hammer and chisel on the David that I hope is going to appear. And by the way, the David never comes to finished full fruition, right? It's an ongoing process and change. So there's costs associated with doing this badly.
You're reminding me of an experience I had as an executive leader in a large organization. And I had folks on my team who I knew were resisting things I wanted. And I thought I was making progress. And my boss came to my town and was doing any number of things for a couple of days in my group's conference room. And I opened the door to see her in the conference room. And what I saw around the table were a dozen people on my team talking to her. And my initial reaction was, oh no. And she just asked me, what have you shared with them about X, Y, and Z? And I kind of went humana, because I hadn't really shared it with them. And I really should have.
Yeah.
Now, my failure, right? Big failure in terms of communication, resistance, organizational dynamics. And I wish she had come to me a day before and just said, hey, are you telling them about X, Y? I'm getting the sense you're not telling them about X, Y, and Z. If you hadn't, that's a deficit you can fix. Why don't you go fix that? So communication in both directions there. I failed to communicate what was coming down. I was relatively new in the job. I didn't realize this is the rhythm of this thing. I should have. That was my failure. But what's the cost of that failure? Seeing your boss in a secret meeting with your staff, that's a pathway to a bad high cost.
Yipes. Yeah. But the question is also, how well is your organization communicating about the basics? Forget about innovation for a moment. And I'll just share one more statistic. Clear Company did research and found that 39% of employees think their company doesn't effectively communicate its mission or goals. That leads to a huge lack of morale and motivation, right? So if you're not even doing the block and tackle, the bread and butter of what's happening in the organization, well, adding a whole other layer of innovation communications, i.e., you're going to have to change, is even going to be more crazy.
I think that's 100% right. And we've certainly seen that in the work we've done for 20 years with all the folks we work with in our membership. I think a fundamental platform idea here about communicating, about storytelling, is if you work for a company, you are in an environment of deeply shared risk and shared opportunity. And if senior management doesn't recognize that and talk about that, talk about both directions of how we are sharing outcomes inevitably. I can't give you a raise, even though you deserve it because we've had a bad year or a bad quarter. Did I even know? I mean, if I'm working in the middle of an organization doing something that's not easy to do and I do it well and I get a nice salary, I'm not necessarily following our quarterly calls with the analysts. I don't necessarily know. And if there's something I can contribute, if there's change coming, because we are slowly failing to match the environment we work in as well as we did in the past, I need to know that in a way that's not threatening explicitly, but that does acknowledge that we're all sharing the risk. And then the policy issue is we need to share the win. We need to share the rewards as well. That closes that loop. I've spent a lot of time with the chief strategy officer at one of the major motor manufacturers. And you look at American auto companies, boy, they're always on a roller coaster up and down. They insulate a lot of their executives and a lot of their kind of line workers from the risk in ways that are ultimately harmful because those insulation points prevent folks from needing to hear what's really going on in the company. If you talk to someone at any automobile manufacturer in the US and you say, how's your company doing? He said, I don't care how they're doing. My contract says I get X. That's all I care about. I'm doing fine. You've missed that chance to have the connection and the emphasis on share. And sometimes when you have the constraints like union contracts, when you have constraints like really hardwired bonus programs, you can lose sight of the signaling, the storytelling, and the decision-making that people do every day as individuals, right? Should we or should we not spend this much money? Should we not buy this new house? Should I or should I not return the call from this headhunt? I need to know, and it's absolutely not the case that a bad quarter or a bad year makes the job less appealing. For many people, especially innovation leaders, especially executives, that challenge can be much more appealing. I would rather go to a company that's in the fight and fighting well and fighting as a cohesive team than go and be fat and happy somewhere else. Now, to some degree, that's my personality and management style. But for many people, and probably for the people you want more, if you have more of an innovation orientation, the risk is really okay so long as it's balanced by shared reward. And the shared reward isn't necessarily just more money. Sometimes it's more responsibility. Sometimes it's working in a different work group, doing work that you value more. How does the company know that that's what you value? And it shouldn't be on you to seek people out and tell them that story. It should be on leadership to create these opportunities for folks to tell their stories. I mean, it's all about alignment. The company has a story, and that needs to sit very closely to its core mission and core goals. I would say in our experience, about half of the large organizations we work with can articulate their core mission and their core goals, and a mission statement has almost nothing to do.
Yeah.
It's what folks do and why they do it. What does your boss do? And how does he or she articulate why? And how do you pick that up as a communication skill and carry that forward? And if you're a CEO, if you're VPs, if you're line workers, can't answer that question, it's a problem. There's a beautiful story under Lyndon Johnson, American president in the early 60s. And he goes to what was then, I believe, the Houston Space Center. It's now the Johnson Space Center. And we had not been to the moon yet. That was a crazy promise John F. Kennedy made. We got there, which was a miracle, right? Kennedy said we'll get there before the end of the decade.
Did we? Did we, Peter?
Yeah, storytelling. Yeah.
We did. I think we did.
Don't make me get my moon rock out.
Yeah, don't let me get my flat earth out. Yeah.
Yeah. So he sees it, and he's such a consummate politician. He can't turn off that politician charm. He sees an African-American man literally pushing a broom, and he breaks away from his crowd and he goes up to this fellow and he says, my name is Lyndon Johnson. What's your name? So, yeah, he said, I'm president of the United States. What do you do? He says, this guy pushing the broom, I help send people to the moon. Oh, Beautiful. And NASA's great strength, I would say, we've done work with NASA for really 20 years. NASA's great strength has always been the storytelling. Now, they've swung and missed more than once on their storytelling, but you look at the power of that brand, you look at the general level of support for their mission, even when they fail, and perhaps especially when they have the worst failures, it does shake people's faith. And how that's part of the story. After that, I believe it was a Challenger that exploded. Ronald Reagan gave a speech, regardless of your politics. When Reagan said to the nation and to the world, we do this to reach beyond our petty planet and to get closer to the source of all things. I mean, what a
Gives
storytelling.
me goosebumps, like hearing you
Yeah.
say it. And I remember it as a kid, like it
Yeah.
was so impactful. And you're right. So there's trends that communications go through with this too, right? We were mission, vision, values driven for a good long time. The conversation I hear in boardrooms now is a lot of North Star.
Yeah.
Those things. I hear a lot of grounded pillars upholding some other bigger vision. So there's all this jargon too, or strategic narrative of the company. What's most effective, Peter, when we're trying to push an innovation agenda of getting people to
Yeah.
do something differently than they did yesterday?
Yeah. So there are two questions bound up, right? One is what's the story, and the other is who's the storyteller. Okay. So interestingly, the story changes when the storyteller changes, and that's probably good.
Yes.
You and I were talking earlier about how listening is actually at the core of great storytelling and great communication. So we begin with the observation, research-based from what we've seen again and again. The best advocate for a research agenda is certainly not the head of research. The best advocate for an innovation agenda is certainly not the head of innovation. The best advocate for an innovation agenda is also not necessarily the CEO, even though their support is very valuable. The best advocate for innovation is a customer. When you have a key customer or someone who represents a lot of smaller customers, who's credible, who's known, who's respected, and we know we need to keep them happy. When they come onto the platform, speaking to all of our peers, and they say, I love this new stuff you're doing. I've gotten some glimpses. It's great. Here's why we need it. Here are our values, and we're so happy to have you as a partner. That gets people together. And
Followed
then
up with where has this been all my life?
Yeah, well, and here I am as the innovation leader, folks. Here I am as your peer and servant, as innovation guy. I want to help give you more tools, more energy, more resources to fulfill the promise that he's heard from.
Yeah.
That's a loop. But what you're going to hear is your customer is not going to stay on script. Your customer is not going to say that she loves exactly what your strategy committee said she loved. So that's a great opportunity for that person to be your proxy storyteller, but you, as a good storyteller, as a good communicator, are also hearing the freedom we give the customer, because if we don't give the customer freedom, the customer is not going to be our customer. Freedom means unexpected journeys. Freedom means you give working groups full freedom. We always think we're going to give you full freedom to do exactly what we want you to do. But if it's real freedom, they're going to do something a little different. And usually the little different thing has a lot of value. Some of which, there's going to be some realignment, like, oh, great work, folks. Let's get you back on base. But some of which I think always is going to be, wow, we management didn't know part of what you've just accomplished. We didn't know that could be done. We didn't know that was important. Now let's blend that with what we really were planning to do. Let's do both. Let's have that collaboration. When we talk about storytelling, one of the things that's really useful to harken back to is why people tell stories, right? We are a storytelling kind of animal. Yeah,
we are. That's how we learn. It's how the brain functions. Not in Excel spreadsheets, not in 3 bullets, unfortunately.
I think that's right. And whether through evolutionary selection or someone's plan in the sky, I really believe that the degree to which we tell stories is kind of, it's a function of the hardwired loneliness we have. One of the advantages of living a long life is you realize that when you were 9 and 19 and 49, and you thought at times no one else was lonely in the world, but you realize that loneliness in some ways is an adaptive trait because it makes us pull people closer, and that actually helps us survive and thrive, right?
Mm.
So that feeling is actually an almost universal feeling. Not quite universal, but it's an almost universal feeling. And stories are a way of pulling people together. It's a way of making connections with each other that reveal our full humanity, our strengths and our weaknesses. And as we think about that, I think it behooves us to make sure we have real investment in human community as part of the storytelling in the workforce. We had a wonderful call, one of our virtual gatherings during the heat of the pandemic, and a fellow from a very large consumer products group. We were talking about diversity and talking about essentially the ways of measuring productivity and contribution toward positive change agendas. And someone had said, well, as you go higher and higher up in organizations, you tend to see less and less diversity. And this guy who was from India, who'd worked in Europe and in Asia and in the US, he said, on the executive floor of my company, part of the secret of our success is that you see people from every country. You see folks speaking 5 different languages. And it's that diversity that's really driven a lot of our innovation more recently. And I think I asked him, how does that happen practically? And he said, honestly, it's committees, it's group, it's policies, it's people getting lunch together. It's people not working together, but living together, at least for a moment. And we've learned this through the work from home Zoom experience during the pandemic. One of the things that was really tested and proven was that people work together virtually once they already know each other personally. So you can look at what a lot of graduate programs do now in American universities. It's brilliant, which is they have what they call the hybrid cohort. We're going to get together for 4 days on campus at the beginning of the term, and then we're going to work remotely together. And then the next term, we're back 4 days. I've been part of some of those programs. The 4 days, even though you're taking lots of classes, it's a party. It's a reuniting of friends. It's what happens in any work environment when you know each other well and haven't seen each other in a while.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? Why does it benefit me to eat with you? Yes, it's a shared vulnerability of a kind. It's a shared physical experience of nutrition, and that literally has an effect on how I view people.
And table manners, which we love to judge one another, frankly.
Table manners, which are themselves a kind of narrative. Who are
Yeah.
you? Where are you from? Do you care about me? When I ask you to pass the bowl of potatoes, do you first take one for yourself, or does your guest come first? Right? These are really big signals.
Fries, yes. Baked potato, no. But go ahead.
Lower cup, one fry. It's a one fry rule. I can always take one fry. But we also tell stories. How's your mom? How are you feeling? How's your kid? Did you take that trip? And we feel less lonely. And that builds trust. That builds knowledge. We learn this person is safe. This person is interesting. This person knows things I don't. Potentially lower the cost of whatever risk I take, trusting this person and working with this person. So when we talk about a storytelling agenda, the company narrative, we have to absolutely parallel that with UX, UI. What's the experience of our colleagues in encountering each other as real people as part of the story? How do we create these storytelling moments? And a lot of them from research, it has to be repeated again and again, where we're also doing fun things. And it's not necessarily field trip to the amusement park. It's a lot of talking. We're thumbs up on shared food from the ILO meetings that we host, the day-long meetings we host. We always try to feed people well, and we always end with a little bottle of wine. And sometimes our meetings typically end at 2 p.m., turn up their nose. It's a little early to be drinking, isn't it? And I'm like, hey, cheers
Who are
to
these
you,
people?
But it's a self-selection. And that's, I think, a final thought about what stories can really do. Emily Dickinson's beautiful poem that has this lovely line, the soul selects its own society. The soul selects its own society. The degree to which you can have informal formation of teams in a large organization, you will move faster and have more success. We learned this from Microsoft years ago, very early in our history, which takes us back 20 years. Microsoft had a really flat org chart. And one of the ways, and a lot of autonomy, and there were pros and cons to that, of course, But one of the ways projects would get staffed, and one of the ways the natural competition in terms of strategic direction, which didn't have enough of from the top at the time, worked itself out, is in the lunchrooms, one leader or one mid-level person would say to the other, "You still working on that project? That project is a loser. You should come on my project. We're winning. Let me share some semi-secret details. Come and work with me because you're good." That kind
Wow.
of informal self-selection. And it's like, yeah, no, that is a great tool for identifying the paths that are more likely to work. It's a kind of market experimentation, and it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's funny. And just to close on this note, because I think this informal conversation is so important, it was a complete shock to me that the storytelling workshops I was doing during the pandemic, virtually, maybe 40 people teams around the world, that my clients would come back to me and say, there's a level 6 months, 8 months, a year later of employee engagement around my team as a result of doing the storytelling that it was an unexpected benefit of
Yeah,
doing this workshop. My team knows how to tell great stories now, but more than that, they shared things that they never would have shared ordinarily
right, right.
because these were stories I was asking them to share that were from their childhood or their
Yeah,
adolescence or what have you, and then converting those into
yeah,
business. And so suddenly now there are stories that are shared that don't get shared in the course
that's right.
of everyday life,
Yeah,
and they have nothing to do with work, which creates some level of trust that it doesn't come any other way, right? Unless we make ourselves just a little bit
yeah,
vulnerable to allow
I
somebody
agree.
else to a corner of our world that
I
wasn't
agree.
there before.
I agree.
Peter, thank you so much for going on this innovation and communication storytelling journey with us. Once again, I want to encourage people, if you haven't investigated the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations, please do. It has been one of the greatest finds of my life to learn at the
Hmm.
feet of the master,
Huh.
Peter Temes, and not to mention the incredible community that you've built of innovation
Yeah,
leaders around the
yeah.
world. And finally, the research that you do that enlightens all of us to how to do this work better every day. So, Peter, where can people find you to learn more about ILO and the work you do?
Well, first, thank you. That might be more praise than we deserve. And I would boost up the community, of course, first and foremost, a great group of people. You're an important part of it. Our website is www.inet, and you can see lots of information about what we do and some little tasting sized portions of some of our research.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us on this 4-episode journey. I know people are going to really enjoy it.
My pleasure. It's been a great opportunity. Thank you.